Hello, and welcome to the second of our Eazi Listening podcasts. This is a podcast for ground transport drivers and operators. My name's Gary Jacobs, and today we are super pleased to be joined by David Lawrie. He's the Director of the National Private Hire and Taxi Association, as well as the Director of Safe Systems CCTV, the only in-car CCTV system designed for the taxi industry. David, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to join.
So we'll give you a little bit of background, and then we'll go into some questions. Now, this is the second in our podcast selection. So just to give you an idea of the format, we've got some industry questions. We're going to really push you to find out some interesting stuff about the brilliant work that you do. But also we've got a little quiz partway through. And we've got the now famous Easy Tax quiz at the end. So, which we so far we haven't got 100% on anything, which is great. So David has been the director of the NPHTA National Private Hire Taxi Association since March 2020, representing the taxi and private hire industry throughout the UK. He's the former chair of the Rosendale Taxi Association, and went on to develop Safe Systems CCTV from the ground up, turning the idea into a nationally recognised and approved public and driver safety enhancement device, now approved by over 50 local authorities. David himself was actually a taxi driver for over 20 years, from 1998 to 2018. So, David, taxi driver for over 20 years. What was the biggest problem you faced as a driver, and how did this inspire you to chair the NPHTA?
The first problem we had was lack of unity, lack of solidarity between the industry. People are very quick to moan and gripe and take to Facebook and complain about the things that the issue that challenge them or they're not happy with. But they're not very good at standing together and doing anything constructive about it, only moaning. So that's why I also found there was a lack of representation or overall representation within the industry. People are very, very quick to create something just to have their own individual voice rather than represent the trade as a whole. So that was the first thing that I decided, that I identified, and I thought, right, okay, so we need to have a more broad spectrum of representation, and we need to find a way to bring people together. The second challenge that I found was if drivers are attacked or abused or robbed or anything like that and they call the police might not bother turning out at all. And even if they do, it's very rare that they offer any support or consolation or take any action based on the fact that there's no evidence. And yet, if those attackers were to abuse the drivers and report the drivers to the council, invariably the drivers lose their badge based on lack of defence, and that's what that's what led to the development of Safe Systems to change that. So those were the two things that I saw needed to change, and that's what I decided to do.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that drivers are very vocal on social media. And I think it comes naturally, because if you're sitting in a car and you're waiting for jobs and everything else, the easiest thing to do is to look on your phone. But I think it was the need for people to have a single voice has always been an issue there. And I think we're actually now coming to an age where operators and authorities are recognising the validity of actually putting the driver's well-being first. I think it's remembering that these are human beings doing a tough trade. So I think it's about time.
It is about time, and it's got to be said that there are an awful lot of extremely good councils out there that do. There's an awful lot of reports out there now that openly say this is about protecting the public and the drivers.
Yeah.
But it's got to be pointed out as well that there's also an awful lot of councils that don't. I actually wrote an article on this, you may have seen in the PHTM, about what is leading to the increasing attacks on drivers. And this was about the policies that are being written by councils, the public image that's being created by the government. When we hear we need to protect the public from these drivers that abuse their position, that's creating the wrong impression. That really is. And when the police don't take action and the CPS don't take action, and even when it goes to court, they get a slap on the wrists. That is not giving the right impression out there. So, obviously it turns drivers into targets.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of talk certainly in London. I've always heard about protection of the public, which obviously is important. But it's amazing that voice does tend to stand alone. It's always about the public protection. But I mean, obviously, as you know, we're accountants. We've got lots of drivers on our books. The amount of drivers that have been the subject of not just physical but verbal abuse. I mean, there's a lot of drivers are receiving verbal abuse every weekend, and in terms of the unacceptable faces of racism and other bits and pieces, it's it's real, and I think that there's it's not a bad idea. So talking about safe systems, tell us, what is it about CCTV that is so important for taxis?
An excellent question. So, as I say, I identified that if a driver is attacked and abused, the police invariably don't turn up. And if they do, they say can't do anything because they've got no evidence. So CCTV is a must. And even today, we see the number of reports a driver's been attacked. We're now appealing. If you were passing with a dash cam, if you were in the area at the time, please give us details. Well, if you had CCTV in that car, you wouldn't need that request because the evidence is there right in front of you.
And what's the take up from local authorities in terms of allowing and not allowing CCTV? Because although from my point of view, we work nationally, but we're very much about the driver's financial side and bits and pieces. So I'm not always, all I tend to hear is from the press. So tell us, what's the attitude and take up in general?
Okay, well, oddly enough, if you'd have asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said it's extremely frustrating because there are still a huge portion of councils that do not allow the installation of CCTV at all. Last year, when the statistics came out, there are only 3 councils in the entire country that do not allow or mandate CCTV right now. One of those was Trafford. They've just fallen in with Greater Manchester's minimum licensing standards and therefore now allow CCTV. By next year, they're going to be mandating it. Another one was Wolverhampton that didn't allow it 2 years ago. They now do allow it, but they don't allow audio. Another one that was Sheffield that allowed CCTV but didn't allow audio. That changed literally last night. They now allow audio as well. It's a hard slog. It really is a hard slog, and it's taken us 10 years to get to where we are now. But because we've been at it for that long, we're now having local authorities that are contacting us and asking our advice and for our assistance, and we're actually writing the criteria for them. But as I'm sure you can agree, and you would confirm, Gary, we have to write a criteria that is generic and that many people would be able to comply with and satisfy as long as they reach those standards. We can't write a criteria that is specific for us as a product, because that'd be restrictive marketing, it'd be illegal, and nobody taking any notice of it anyway.
Yeah.
But it is rapidly becoming a national criteria and a national standard, and that's something that simply has to happen, because you can't have inferior protection in one area but superior in another. You've got to have a national standard, and even if you don't mandate CCTV, you have to have a standard in place. Otherwise, you're leaving it wide open for dash cams to be used, and they cannot be used to record internally at all.
Well, I know that we've had a big pushback from some of the concierge or chauffeur type companies who say that their clientele wouldn't find it acceptable to be filmed in any way, shape, or form in the back. Which is, well, how do you feel about that?
It's strange because we get a lot of people approaching us as well from specifically the executive and chauffeur type. Some of them are exactly the same as you've just described, and they say that their clientele would not allow it. For some strange reason, film stars don't want to be on camera. Weird. Film stars don't want to be on CCTV, but they'd be happy to be in a restaurant, a supermarket, a council building, on the street, on a plane, on a train, on a bus. Well, maybe not on a bus. But when we were at the PHTM Expo, which, as you know, is one of the largest industry exhibitions that bring together people anyway.
We're
We were
always
actually
there.
approached by a we were actually approached by a limousine company who said, "Are you approved by TfL? Let us know when you are because we need this." So there is that variety even within the executive and chauffeur sector. But I did note with interest one of the local authorities that has gone down the mandatory route has incorporated an exemption for executive. So it
Well,
is something that's been taken seriously.
yeah, the only reason I say it is because I'm certainly no expert in this area, but that's feedback I've heard from some of the companies. But I suppose it's I think it's time. We have historically spoken about the passenger safety, which is of the utmost importance in terms from a licensing perspective and from a general well-being perspective. But it is time that we started to think about the protection of the drivers. It's a tough enough living as it is. I know, as from an accountant's point of view. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure who the ones that were actually saying it are. I'm not sure who the ones that actually say are my clients. But maybe it's because there's some people in the back of chauffeur cars that don't want their activity to be noted. So.
But this is an important point, Gary, and I'm glad you raised that. Then, this entire sector, or this entire element of the sector, is heavily regulated by the Information Commissioner's Office.
Yeah.
So it's important that the understanding is out there that the ICO have ruled that data may only be accessed where there is a legitimate interest.
Yeah.
They go further to explain that to mean legitimate interest is the specific date and time that relates to an alleged crime having taken place. Now, that means that data is secure anyway. So unless that high-class passenger is going to get into the back of the vehicle, attack the driver, and then be reported, that data is never going to be seen by anybody.
No.
So that's an important aspect to remember.
So obviously you've done the job yourself for quite some years before you started all this. What do you think, and let's just change the subject a little bit, what's the biggest change to the trade that you've seen in the last 20 years?
The move across onto electronic bookings and platforms. It's seen an upgrade of the, let's say, larger operators. It's in the amalgamation of a lot of operators. But it's also had a negative impact on a lot of the one-man bands. Because, of course, it's not worth it to them to buy into booking platforms and have an app because they're only a sole trader. So that has had an impact, and I think a lot of it as well has created this false perception that everybody gets a text message now when you book a vehicle.
Yeah.
Because nobody in the world has ever lost their phones. Nobody in the world has ever had a flat battery on their phone or has ever had poor signal. And nobody has ever gone to a pub landlord or a hotel receptionist and said, "Can you book me a taxi, please?"
I think it's it's funny because I was talking in the last podcast about the fact that as a profession, we've gone from guys coming in with a shoebox full of receipts to us expecting them to use data capture apps, and and my big thing is at the end of the day, I'm expecting people to still be bringing in shoeboxes of receipts. The only thing is, it's now our obligation to ensure that the regulate, that they're compliant to the regulations. So it's the same way. It's interesting because we always talk about technology and the ride-hailing apps and operators and boarding technology, but there are still lots of firms out there where somebody picks up a phone and then somebody comes and picks somebody else up. And I don't think that's going in the short term anyway. So it's an interesting one.
No, I mean there's a slight difference. There's a slight difference between the tax because as I'm sure you're far more aware than I am. You've got the legislation of making tax digital, but there is no legislation that's going to say a 76-year-old passenger must use an app because they just don't. Whereas making tax digital, everybody can take a picture of a receipt And that's the difference there. So even a sole trader can make tax digital, but they can't necessarily make their service digital.
I actually think it's the same. I moved house recently, and I lived in my previous place for quite a long time before that, and I was amazed at how many companies that will only have a digital interface to change the address, and a few of the the service facilities, and even my own bank. Didn't get it right. We gave them a new address and it never came up on the screen. And it's, I mean, I've spoken about this before. There is still a significant percentage of the population who are in digital poverty. If you don't have a computer or access to a smartphone, there are certain regulatory compliance obligations that people just can't do. And I think it's I don't want to get too far off point here, but there are people that are left in terrible communication and digital poverty because they don't have access to it. And actually, elderly and vulnerable people are significant users of ground transport.
Yeah. So our very clients are affected by the fact that they're not tech savvy. They don't have apps. We still have people that don't even have a mobile phone, let alone a smartphone.
No, absolutely. Right. We're going to, we've done some business bits. We're going to do some icebreaker questions now.
Run for the hills.
So here we are. This is, I've got a couple of questions for you for the real, we're going to find out who the real David Lawrie is. So.
Do I know who that is?
It's questions, not therapy.
Okay.
If you could be an expert in anything that you're not already an expert in, what would it be? So we know that you are expert in many, many things and you have to be doing what you do. But if you could suddenly become an expert in something that you're not already an expert in, what would you like to be? What would you like to know? What would you like to do?
Is this a desired knowledge base or...
Yeah, if you'd like to learn something in detail and to be considered an expert on, outside of everything you already know, what would it be? If I could switch a button.
If you could switch a button, if you could press a button somewhere and instantly give me the ability to do something, please make me multilingual.
Oh, okay.
I would love to be able to understand far more languages than I already do and speak fluently in them. And it would make my life a heck of a lot easier, not only within the industry, but with my wife and her family.
Well, unfortunately, that's the great British disposition, isn't it? Our inability to learn languages beyond our own. Well, I'm afraid we can ask the question, and it was a very good answer, actually. What we can't do is actually grant you it. So I'm afraid you're just going to have to continue speaking loudly in overseas restaurants. So I'm sorry about that.
And slowly. In the same words.
If you had to be anything other than what you are in your career, what would it be? So if you could, once again, if I could flick a switch and you could be any other career but the career you're in, what would it be?
In all honesty, probably a doctor or a surgeon.
Cool.
Because the only thing I like doing and the only thing I take satisfaction or pleasure in doing is helping people. So when I first left the kids' homes, my first role was in nursing home, where I was helping the elderly and those with special education needs get into school and things. And now, of course, I'm helping those that don't have a voice within the industry to speak up. So if I wasn't helping people in this role, I'd like to be able to do it in a medical role. So
cool.
Yeah.
No, that's once again, that's actually spot on answer. And okay, what did you want to be as a child? What career can you remember what you wanted to be when you were younger?
My only desire as I was growing up or being dragged up through the kids' homes was to turn the tables and be on the other side and help kids and be one of the carers in the kids' homes. I couldn't do that because I didn't have the money to go through university. And that's why I went into nursing. But yeah, the only desires I ever had or working roles was to work with people, helping people, and to work with cars. And I'm now doing both.
Yeah, so you're basically you're living your dream.
Yeah.
All I want to do is be taller, but never mind.
I'd like to earn more money doing it, but in fact, I'd like to earn some money doing it. But there you go. You can't have everything.
I'm not going to be lost for words, but it's a wonderful thing to say. So, okay, let's talk about some big subjects then. We've had a few light ones. Driver shortages. And you knew we were going to get to that eventually. I had to sit through another meeting recently of a well-known trade association, and of course, to be fair, it's the thing that's on everybody's lips. I mean, I can tell you now. This is the Gary Jacobs opinion, which is, I've spoken to quite a few operators, and they are, you say to them, well, how's business? And they're all busy. Everybody's very busy. But the one thing everybody then comes back with is, I just wish there was enough people to fulfill. So, as far as you're concerned, what can the government and local authorities do to help drivers? What can we as a trade do to either bring more drivers in or help drivers come back to work? Because where did they go?
I note your interesting sidestep there to avoid mentioning which group. We do actually work with them anyway, but it's fine.
I love everybody. You've got to remember that.
And we all love you. But yeah, I mean, we've been within the government bodies. I've been on BBC radio and press interviews, and the subject of driver shortages have come up within all of them. And the other trade reps, and again, I'm not going to mention anagrams, other trade reps and I have been made presentations side by side on the very same subject.
Yeah.
And you're right, operators will say, on one hand, we're busy, it's great, we've got loads of work coming in. But that very same statement is a double-edged sword. They've got too much work coming in and not enough drivers to cover it. So there is a huge driver shortage. What caused it? COVID, I suppose. The drivers had to find a way to put food on their table and feed their families and pay their mortgages. So they went into deliveries and food deliveries and takeaways and courier work, and they're not coming back. You leave a local authority where you have them breathing over your shoulder and you can lose your license at a moment's notice based on a report. You go into couriers as a temporary measure. You find you don't have that anymore, and you can run an older vehicle. You can run whatever colour vehicle you want without the council's input. You ain't coming back to that role. So that's the first thing that caused it. Then when the COVID took that long for us to start to recover from, and in the meantime, we had the new statutory standards and we had new conditions coming in from local authorities. We've even seen local authorities, believe it or not now, that are trying to pass the buck and ask for local trade groups to create their ambassadors to perform the licensing role for them and assess the applications and submit them online, rather than drivers going into the council and doing it direct, as the councils are paid to do. Then now the trade are having to do them as volunteers. We've even seen councils that are saying, right, we're going to provide a 3-day training course in the subject of mental awareness, and you will then be a qualified counsellor and you'll be able to talk people away from the brink of suicide. Really? Then you see
drivers.
They want drivers to go on a 3-day course to become a qualified counsellor, which is a 3-year university course. I know, I've done it.
I mean, I'm a big fan of drivers being aware of modern slavery, vulnerable children, because there is a level of responsibility as a human. If you're in the streets, you're driving around and people, but
that's safeguarding. That's a safeguarding role, not a counselling role.
But to put the responsibility of counselling in the hands of a driver that's got to earn a living is probably asking a tad too much.
Hold on a minute. Let's take it a stage further, Gary. To put that role into the hands of a driver, when over the last 5 years we've seen thousands of drivers lose their badges due to an allegation of saying something that was inappropriate, is a contradiction in terms.
Because I would imagine if I was a driver, I want to keep my head front, drop them off as little interaction as possible.
And you certainly don't want to be accused as being the person that said the wrong thing and actually tipped something over the edge.
Yeah.
Very, very dangerous move to make. So what's the overall impact of this? Drivers aren't coming in. Drivers are finding it far too expensive and onerous, and they're having to wait far too long for badges. So they're not coming into the trade. So the driver shortage is going to stay unless the local authorities do something about it and start to encourage people back into the trade and incentivize it.
Yeah.
What's the immediate right here, right now effect? As we've just touched on, you and I, operators wish they had more drivers. They can't get the drivers to cover the work, which means that when Larry the Lout is out there on the Nag's Head on the corner of the side street waiting for a taxi for an hour, and he's chucking it down and he's wet through with his wife, who's scantily clad and ripping his ear off because she's cold, he's going to take it out on the driver, and the increase on attacks is reflective of that. Drivers are being attacked far more now than they've ever been, and that is even more of a discouragement to get into the trade.
I think there's been a lot of issues with service workers across the country. We seem to have come out of this pandemic quite angry in many cases, and I think it's an issue for all people. But I certainly think, I mean, I remember the days, it just shows how old I am, when there was a big issue with the fact that the police I'm a London boy from East London. So, and I remember in the early days, the big thing for the police were, let's get people off the streets when the pubs shut, when the clubs shut on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
And what it meant was it was open season for unregistered drivers, and let's be very clear. We're not talking about our private hire brothers that are out there doing the job and everything else. These were unlicensed guys. And it was actually stopping the police giving priority to getting people off the street into any car whatsoever, and actually starting for them, I'm talking a long time ago now, but actually start to recognise the validity of ensuring that those people who normally were in a drunken state or whatever were actually getting into a properly licensed vehicle. And I remember that it was quite a journey for the authorities to actually understand the need that we've got to temper the need to clear the streets with the need to actually have the right people in the right vehicles suitably registered. So
you're
there's
right.
always a...
You are right, and don't forget, of course, that whilst the rest of the country the private hire industry wasn't regulated until the 1976 Act, London wasn't regulated for private hire until the 98 Act.
Yeah.
And I've even come across it where I've approached the police and said, that vehicle over there is not licensed, and the response from the police is, don't care as long as they get them off the street.
Right, and absolutely, and it's amazing. So there's obviously going to be a drag in terms of any authority or legislative body, regulatory body, is going to accept the fact, and especially unfortunately when it comes to the driver protection. So it's a difficult one. So here we go. Let's look at the next thing we're having, and you're going to like this one because we've done our research.
Oh,
David, you were a critic of the Manchester Clean Air Zone. Tell us, you knew I was going to go there. Tell us more about your work with changing this legislation.
Right. Okay. There's a lot of things that took place within the Transport for Greater Manchester Clean Air Zone, which was the largest charging zone in Europe, not just the UK, in Europe. It was 562 miles, I think, wide.
Wow.
So when it first came out, we were involved in the consultation. We put presentations in. That didn't do enough. So in 2020, I was in Poland organising a protest that took place in Manchester via the internet and monitoring everything that's going on. And then that protest involved many members of our organisation, and I'm avoiding the anagram,
and others,
including the Hackney industry and the Hackney drivers as well within Manchester, and that culminated outside of Andy Burnham's office. That didn't do enough. He still wasn't ready for dropping it. So when it came to the mayor elections in 2021, I approached other mayoral candidates and said, right, if you can promise to scrap this charging zone, we'll push you forward. That led to Andy Burnham releasing a video that said, this is a video directly aimed at the taxi and private hire drivers. It wasn't, it was aimed at me. Please don't listen to the Conservative lies. They forced us to do that. He completely ignored the clean air, the Green Earth campaigners that took it to court, and it was the court that forced the government, not the other way around. This is their plan. No, they just said, you've got 2 hotspots there. What are you going to do about it? This size of this zone is your idea, pal. I promise there will never be a charging zone while I'm mayor. Very cleverly worded. While I am mayor. And what was going to happen after that? But it still wasn't enough. It still wasn't ready for stopping it. So then I got together a few people and we launched. If you have a look for it on Facebook, you'll see Rethink the Clean Air Zone, Greater Manchester. It's got over 80,000 members in there, and we did another protest in February of this year, and that included this time courier drivers, delivery drivers, horsebox drivers, private hire drivers, hackney carriage drivers. It was a biggie, and we were all over, including my all-time favourite was a quote with Manchester Evening News, where they quoted me as having said, unless they can show us how they're going to erect a big steel dome right around that entire radius like they did in Springfield in The Simpsons and suck out the dirty, dirty, horrible air with nice big clean fans that are pumping in the so lovely clean air, what they're exactly doing with the money they're taking out of drivers' pockets. How can they justify taking that money, which is then actually going to undermine the ability of drivers to upgrade their vehicles because you're taking the money off them? So then I did another podcast similar to this with a couple of MPs who then went into Parliament and made announcements in parliamentary question time. And then Andy Burnham said, I've told the government it won't work and I need to reassess it. No, you didn't. You were summoned by the government to answer for why the hell you were getting so much public backlash from this. They gave you a little bit longer. As a result, the clean air zone in Manchester, that was another one. He kept saying, the taxi and private hire drivers are objecting to clean air. No, we're not. We're objecting to a charging zone, pal. We all want clean air. If you want to give me an oxygen mask to drive around with, great, give it. And I'll pay you for it, no problem. But unless you're going to give me that oxygen mask for that clean air and all of my customers and all my community, no, stop taking money out of my pocket. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to achieve anything. We create clean air in Manchester and then the wind blows from Scotland and you suddenly got dirty air again. Sorry, Scotland, that wasn't implying that Scotland got dirty air. But it was the example. The clean air zone is only valid as long as there's no strong wind. It's by the same as, I suppose, so's dirty air, I suppose. Works both ways, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say.
So, yes, it's now changed into a clean air plan, which is a non-charging scheme. Result, jackpot. Happy days. Let's see if we can get it rolled out elsewhere.
Yeah, but that's and that shows, and it actually just shows the importance of representation, the importance of somebody actually taking up a voice for it. So interesting. Yeah. So here we are. Let's look to the future. Now, obviously we've spoken about this. I did the whole big tax checks warning. That obviously we are now in that environment where drivers, in order to get their license to relicense, have got to go through a tax check in the gov.uk.
The conditionality check.
Well, it's funny because when I was on the original, I actually looked at my original emails when I went to the HMRC committee when they were first talking about how to do it, and they called it conditionality. Oh no, was it continuity?
Continuity. Originally.
Then when they issued the paper on it, it said conditionality. Now, when you see the government referring to it, because nobody ever knew what they were talking about, they now start to call it the tax check. So we've got, I haven't had to remember the wording anymore. What's interesting is I said to everybody, that if you don't offer the services to drivers for people like us, any accountant, to help somebody do their tax return, or their back duty, or their failure to notify tax return, which and I can say it because it's our podcast, which is really easy to do, and it's not as complicated as people think it is, and it's never as expensive as people think it is. Anyway, we've done loads and loads of these back duty checks so that people can get their tax check code, and also taking into consideration that you don't actually give your unique tax reference number. What you do is you have to go into the government.uk, you have to answer 5 questions, and they give you a one-off number. Since that time, 7,000 people have not renewed their license so far. And that's a conservative figure, because I think that's now a month or 2 months old. And the big warning to operators was, well, once upon a time, and I'll quote from you, 10 years ago, if a driver didn't want to drive, didn't want to renew his license, what was he going to do? Well, the answer nowadays is he's going to deliver food, he's going to deliver parcels, he's going to whatever, go out and do something else, which is why we as an industry have to love and attract and retain drivers. So tax checks has been going for a while now. Operators have lost drivers because they haven't invested in ensuring that they were coming back in. We knew it was going to happen, but the government has considered it as a success because lots of drivers have registered, and there's lots of new people being introduced to HMRC, and there's lots of guys who were actually unregistered and realised that it wasn't as terrible as they thought it was going to be, and are now registered and back driving and doing their jobs. So fantastic, and we will be going on and doing this for 3 years. That's our journey, and for us as a practice, we've got Making Tax Digital and the tax checks and things coming on. David Lawrie, where are the oncoming storms in the future of passenger transport?
It's interesting that you quote the number of drivers that have left, and it may be that some of them is down to the check code or conditionality code. It may also be that we're not even on the 3rd year of renewals yet from COVID epidemic, and those that haven't renewed through there. Yeah. So, it may have an effect, but I don't think it's right to assume that that's the whole effect and that's the whole reason why those haven't come back.
It's not a huge figure either, to be fair.
No, when you
in terms of the numbers, it's not. No. It's a
7,000 out of 552,000. It's quite minor, really.
But it's we've got to, if you project that over a 3-year period. But you know what? I'm not here to be controversial. It's the fact is that some people have chosen not to. But go on, David. The big oncoming storms. Where are we going to head?
The big oncoming storms. I think you're going to have major issues with the rollout or misinterpretation of new acts of legislation that have come out. I mean, one of those being the Deregulation Act, of course. People think it means that they can work wherever they want for whoever they want, and it doesn't. It simply means that operators can subcontract between each other. The next one that came out was this NR3 database, the National Register of the 3 Licenses. Let's call it what it is. Let's simplify it. It is not an anti-fraud database at all. It's a National Register of 3 Licenses. That's why it's called NR3. The only reason there's any reference to fraud is because it was a national anti-fraud platform that were asked to develop the database on behalf of the local authorities. That's why it's referred to as fraud. It's nothing to do with fraud at all. So one of the safeguarding issues that was released as an act of legislation in February removed councils may feed into it and turned it into councils must feed into it. The second one that came out is the disability access one that was released in April this year. Even yesterday, I was listening to councillors saying that puts a duty on drivers to provide a service and operators to gather information. That's not what it did at all. What it did was it placed a burden on local authorities to maintain and create an easy accessible register of wheelchair accessible vehicles. And it placed more of a burden on passengers to notify operators if they had a disability, because to quote the MP that wrote the Act, not all disabilities are visible. So it created a bit of an exemption. So I think the biggest problem that we have within the industry is the misunderstanding, not just with operators and drivers thinking it means far more than it actually does, but the lack of understanding with local authorities, even with regards, and I'll bring that right back to simplify it. Since we've mentioned the tax conditionality check code, you and I, Gary, we were both in web podcasts, whatever they call them. Yeah.
We were online,
Meetings.
David. What we were, yeah.
With HMRC, with the IOL, with each other, trying to get the message out there, and yet we're still seeing drivers saying, you just need your URL number. No, it's nothing to do with that. We still see local authorities saying, if you want to renew your plates, you must give us a tax conditionality check code. And I actually had to report some of them to HMRC for blackmailing drivers and saying, if you do not apply for your code as if you're a driver and give us that, we won't give you your plates.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. So there's a massive misinterpretation out there, and that in itself is causing confusion, it's causing lack of awareness, and it's creating, redeveloping or reaffirming that us versus them mentality. And that's why the likes of you and I come in and say, hang on, oi, come here. Sit down, listen carefully, I'll dumb it down for you.
Yeah. Well, as you know, we did videos, and we've got all kind of resources on the website and things. And I still get part. I mean, it's a bit like I don't really want to mention it too much, but that everybody's talking about a certain form of direct tax. Sorry, that is the thing at the moment. The VAT issues in the industry, which is, well, I'm not going to go there because I end up annoying myself. But what happens is I still have a lot of operators phoning me up saying, what's the position? And I still have operators phoning me up and saying, I've got drivers that can't get their license. What's the position? And I think to myself, you and I, we went a long way to try and help people to understand issues in the industry, and we try and get out as much as we can do. But we actually need a bit of helping hand from the government, really, because one of the things that, if you remember, some of the podcasts that some of the webinars that we did, we were doing them to licensing officers who also, to be fair to them, were not informed properly of what their expectations, obligations were. So, when new legislation comes in, it shouldn't be a dirty secret. And I think that's the problem. But how we persuade our legislators to do this properly, I don't know. HMRC. We're talking about making tax digital. You mentioned before. I'm off to some of the big accountancy conferences coming up. They're now talking about putting it back again. I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen. I hope it doesn't, because we just need to do it and get on with it. But they're now saying maybe we should be putting it back. So I get the idea the government's got enough on its hands. So there we go.
Well, I think installing the revolving door at number 10 kind of didn't help.
No.
And this is a discussion I had with the Joint Air Quality Unit on the subject of the clean air zones, because I was saying, we don't know what's going to happen with this yet, we don't know what's going to happen with that yet. The same with the Department for Transport following their consultation on the new government best practice guidance. The consultation ended on the 20th of June, and we're still waiting for an update. And they both said, the ministers keep changing hands. And the last time they said it, I said, well, it shouldn't take us long this time. And they said, why not? I said, well, they just had a practice run a month ago.
We've still got an overhang of questions that are coming out post Brexit about chauffeur companies doing overseas. People, if they're engaging, instructing people overseas, and how that transmutes to their VAT position, and who charges what and how, and post Brexit, HMRC said, well, we don't know, and so everyone, there's loads of accountants still sitting around waiting for them to say what they do know. So we're not the only industry that's scratching our head post a big thing, but because we did have a new prime minister for a while, didn't we? Can't remember her name.
Should we just call her? Yeah, let's stick with her. But yeah, I mean, I don't like to get involved in politics, and if you'd have asked me 20 years anything about politics, I'd have just gone, not interested. I've got just as much interest in that as I have in football. But within our role, we have to watch what's going on in politics. Whether we agree or not, whether we sit on the fence or not, is besides the point. We just have to analyse what comes out and then translate that, which reverts back to the ability you offered me earlier on, then took away. It made me multilingual. To be able to translate from legalese to councilese to gobbledygook and then into simple English that we can all understand.
I think we're now in an age where politics is actually taking money out of our pockets, so we have to politic. That's the truth about it as an industry.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's interesting about the current case, let's call it that. HMRC were actually in one of the recent regulator stroke industry meetings. Did that very well, avoiding any anagrams and names, didn't they? And when I explained how I understand that particular case to literally be, HMRC themselves said, actually, that makes sense. But we're all watching, and how is it going to affect them? What does it mean? What is it about? Well, it's about two letters. You put those two together, and they make such a small word with a huge meaning. If.
Yeah.
If my cat barked, she'd be a dog.
Absolutely right, and I think it's, without falling down the rabbit hole that is that there is a lot of ifs at the moment, and there's nothing wrong with preparing for. Okay, so let's say, you're talking about VAT on fares. It's an if, but we've got to be ready. We've got to be prepared if it is an if, and also the government have said that they will look at taxation on fares. They're going to look at it. They're not necessarily going to do anything about it, but they might do. And I think that there is nothing wrong. The advice that I'm giving out at the moment is to stay in the holding zone, because I wouldn't overreact. We need to react appropriately when we know, but let's get the case over and let's see where we go. So, I think it's
the judge is hoping to release their judgment before Christmas, which is only a month away. But they did say within 6 months, but they were hoping to have it before Christmas. And you get people out there saying, "Oh, why isn't David Lawrie getting involved?" Well, it's not about David Lawrie. It's about having that voice. And if there are people that have put their names forward, including members of ours, including one of our board members, it doesn't need to be about David Lawrie. It doesn't need to be about the anagram that I represent. There is representation out there. We agree with that representation. Let them run with it. And let's just, as you say, let's be prepared. Let's do another podcast following the results of the judgment, and let's analyse exactly what that judgment means.
And I always get in trouble for saying this, but let's see if it actually leads to legislation, which is very different than a court result. And I've said this before with the Uber case in London and the definition of principle and all the rest of it. There's a very big difference between recognition in a lower tier court, recognition in an upper tier court, and it making legislative process, which we know in this country takes quite a long time. And but that's, we're getting into, as I say, it's a rabbit hole we can fall down. Let's lighten the mood now, and we're going to get back to finding out who the real David Lawrie is. So we've got one more icebreaker question before you have to take the Eazi Listening quiz. Here we are, David. Obviously not going to happen within but it's your last meal. They're just about. They've just made trade associations illegal, so they'll be hanging you tomorrow, in a good way.
I'm on.
What would it be? Your last meal: starter, main, dessert, and you get a choice of 2 drinks.
Starter. Prawn mayonnaise. Or prawn cocktail.
Okay. No tomato ketchup in there.
No. Tomato ketchup has got its place, and that's on chips.
Just to let you know, this is this is the second podcast where prawns and mayonnaise have featured in the answer, so that's pretty good. Mains?
Main. Quite difficult because I'm actually a vegetarian.
I can do wonderful things with aubergines, but that's for a different podcast.
That's for Gene as well. Oh, different Gene. Right, okay. I think I would probably go because I remember a Christmas meal that I went to, and I decided to really treat myself. This about 25 years ago, and I had halibut.
Oh, halibut! Look at you.
So I
And
may, I mean, if it was going to be an all-out treat, I'd probably go for something similar to a halibut again.
I'm a big fan of the halibut. And what would the what's your drink of choice? Just to bring that in there, what would accompany all this?
It would. It depends of drink of convenience or favourite drink.
Well, you get 2 drinks, so you can have one of each.
Not really good to mix the two though, because I do like a whiskey and coke. And when I say whiskey and coke, I'm not talking about whiskey and coke the way everybody else means it, with a big tall glass, a little bit of whiskey, and top it up with coke. I'm on about put some whiskey in there and just darken it a little bit. That's it. Just a splash of coke and that's it. Yeah, just take the bite off it, but don't kill the flavour. But I'm also I encountered Malibu and orange when I was in Corfu on a holiday once, and I absolutely loved it. So Malibu and orange is fresh orange. Fresh orange. It's got to be fresh orange.
I can honestly say that was not what I was expecting to come. And I'm pretty damn impressed. So okay, so you find. Oh, what's your dessert? What does a man like you? What's a big dessert for you?
I'm very much a cake and custard.
Oh, okay.
Very much a cake and custard. Yeah.
Right. I should remember that. I too am a big fan of the cake and custard.
Gotta have custard.
But it's got to be proper custard.
Oh yeah. None of this out of the tin stuff. No, get your custard powder, a bit of sugar, a pint of milk, mix it up, bring it up. Yeah.
Got to leave it for a little while because I like rolling the skin off the top as well.
Yeah. Same with porridge. You've got to have a nice little skin just to rice pudding with the brown bits on. Oh, right. Come on, we're going on.
Okay.
I knew you me hungry.
Well, that's okay because in the last one it was all champagne and Black Forest Gatto, wasn't it? So we're getting well down. And here we are. We're going to go with the with finally this the Eazi quiz, which is how much do you know about Eazi tax? We're testing all of our people. We're not expecting anything. So we haven't done any homework, and we're not expecting anything. So my favourite one was here's the simple one because people always get this wrong. What year was Eazi Tax formed? And this is any iteration because we used to be called Driver Tax, I think, as most people know. So how long have we been around?
Wasn't it towards the late 80s, 86, 87?
I wish. I'm not that old. So not a bad guess. We were actually started in 1996. In our current form.
A lot newer than I thought. I thought you were around a lot longer than that. You see, you've created an impression.
I was around as an accountant, but Eazi Tax as the company was
okay.
Formed as it was. Okay. And then we've got my personal favourite one, which is and we're going to be changing this for the next podcast, but we're going to go with this because you haven't heard the last podcast yet because we haven't issued it quite. So one of these is a lie. 3 of them are the truth. Tell us which one is a lie. Are you ready for this? You'll like this. Gary can ride a horse. Gary is a herpetologist, which is a love of reptiles. Gary is trained in goat husbandry. And Gary can read Aramaic. Do you want those again? One of those is a lie.
I would go, if I was going to hazard a guess there, I would go at C. I do seem to recall you us talking about linguistics and language, and I remember you saying something about the 4th one, Aramaic. You do seem quite energetic, so I wouldn't say that you're not a horse rider.
Okay. This man's got me posted, isn't he? He's got me absolutely upright. And the herpetologist.
The herpetologist. Yeah. You're a man with broad horizons. You're a man with broad interests. So I've no reason to disbelieve that could be genuine. I'm not saying it is.
I think you. Well, I'm quickly out in a minute because I think you've got me pegged. I am not trained in goat husbandry,
Exactly.
although I'm expecting by the middle of next year that I will be trained in goat husbandry because it's one of the courses that I've always wanted to do. But well done. So you really know me. That's brilliant. And here's the last one, which is we'll be gentle with you, which is, and this is just one. It's really funny because I've always had a go at our marketing guy, and I'm allowed to have a go at me because I consider my marketing and sales team as just my errant children. But we've always put where was Eazi Taxi's first office? Now, you may well not know this, but it's the one because they keep putting it in everything they ever write about me. They start off by saying, so here we are. So you either know or you don't. Where was Eazi Taxi's first office? And it's not a geographic area.
It's not a geographic area. Okay.
Yeah, so you don't have to think of,
the location itself. I would think that you originally launched yourself or your service from home.
My first office was a converted garage in the bottom of my garden. Well done. So listen, David, it only counts for me to say thank you. It's been fascinating, and also I think we've learned a little bit about you as well. I had no doubt of your massive breadth of knowledge and the work that you do, both through your company and through the National Private Hire Taxi Association. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and I think we're going to have another podcast after the results of the thing. I'm sure we'll have plenty to say, but thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for inviting me, and I remain available at any time if you want to discuss or you want to do another one of these, even a multiple one. I'm here to help in any way I can. Always have been, always will be. It's who I am. It's my mantra.
It is. Thank you very much. And a deserved match as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much.